I'm going to talk to you now about one of my favourite people from antiquity, and that's Cyrus the Great. And if anybody is worthy of the title, the Great, then it is this king of Persia. Last time we talked about the nomadic background of the Persians. Cyrus came from one of these groups, these nomadic groups in the southwest of Iran, around the area of Parsagad. In fact, his tribe was called the Parsagadai, so those from Parsagad. Now, he was clearly a young man of amazing ambition. He managed to unite a whole disparate group of tribes in the south of Iran under his name and his leadership. And under his quite clearly charismatic personality, he marched north and he conquered the sister tribes of Iran, the Medes. And when the Median tribes fell to Cyrus, so fell all of their adjacent lands. And some of these stretch right the way into what is modern-day Turkey. So within about 4 or 5 years, Cyrus found himself as the master of the whole of Iran, the Central Plateau, as well as parts of northern Turkey too. And now that he was master of these, his ambitions grew. Going into Anatolia, into Turkey, he realized he wasn't too far away from one of the great star prizes of antiquity, the city of Sardis. This Greek-speaking city lay on the western coast of Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey. And Cyrus, with his unified army, marched on the city, conquered it, and took away its spoils. It was one of the wealthiest places in the world. And so suddenly the Persians had more money, more wealth than they ever knew possible. But Cyrus's ambition didn't end there, because as he began to march back towards Iran, his eye fell on the major prize of all, the great city of Babylon. Babylon was the mother of all ancient cities, truly the biggest city in the world at that time, multi-ethnic, very varied, the center of culture, of arts, of learning, sophistication, and of course economics. It was the prize worth taking. Now we know from various Babylonian sources that Cyrus battled his way towards Babylon. And he didn't take many prisoners, quite literally. He obliterated cities. Near Babylon was a city called Opis. And we know that Cyrus and his troops razed the city to the ground, massacring all the inhabitants. Is it any wonder then that when Cyrus and his army approached Babylon, the city opened its gates to him willingly? Or at least that's what Cyrus tells us in his inscription, which we call the Cyrus Cylinder. This strange block of clay, densely written in cuneiform, in the language of Babylonian, was discovered in the 1870s, dug down deep in the foundations of the temple of Marduk, the great god of the Babylonians. And this cylinder, covered with this writing, is a piece of propaganda clearly commissioned by Cyrus the Great to commemorate his victory. And in it, he states that the god Marduk looked out for a champion, and he found the champion in Cyrus. And so Marduk took Cyrus by the hand and led him victoriously into the streets of Babylon and declared him King of Kings, King of Babylon, King of the 4 quarters of the world. Now, there's obviously a stretch of the imagination going on there, and it's quite clear that Cyrus is writing this from the victor's point of view. And I'm sure if you ask the average Babylonian on the street what had happened, he would say that this was conquest of his city. But in the Cyrus Cylinder, Cyrus declares this to be a liberation of Babylon, Operation Babylonian Freedom, if you like, that he is liberating Babylon from the oppression of its former kings who were negligent towards the gods. Marduk has looked out and he found me, says Cyrus. And it's very interesting that Cyrus is also named in another important ancient source, and that's the Hebrew Bible, what we call the Old Testament. In the book of Isaiah, God, the Jewish God, Yahweh, looks down for a champion and sees Cyrus. And Yahweh, God, says, "I took him by the hand and made him my champion." Exactly the same words that are discovered in the Cyrus Cylinder. Is this a coincidence? I don't think so. This is part of Cyrus's propaganda machine. How did Cyrus end up in the Hebrew Bible? Well, that's because after decades and decades of exile, Cyrus allowed the Jews to go back home to Jerusalem and rebuild their lives and rebuild their temples. And so he gets good publicity in the Hebrew Bible as the God's anointed. That's the word Messiah. He is the only man in the Hebrew Bible who is a Gentile, a non-Jew, to get this title, God's anointed. So in two pieces of propaganda, the Cyrus Cylinder and the Hebrew Bible's book of Isaiah, Cyrus comes out as this paragon of rulership, the ideal king who works and puts his hand in the hand of God. Doesn't matter what God, you'll see. Cyrus is pragmatic. He works with different gods and different peoples. And this idea of Cyrus being the liberator, the great, comes down to us today. But when you read through the Cyrus Cylinder, I would always ask you to keep something in mind. How true is this? Debate all the time. What is propaganda? What's the message that Cyrus wants to send across?